Whenever the newest and top-of-the-line computer components are released to the public, hand in hand come the video games that fully utilize their potential. And with leading hardware manufacturers competing to push out the highest performing parts for the best price almost yearly, it's clear why the gaming industry has been consistently experiencing a technological incline. Let's take a look at a few games that were created specifically to push the boundaries of what PCs can render and display at high refresh rates. For those of you looking to upgrade your rig, take a look at the recommended requirements of some of these most graphically demanding games to draw some inspiration. Bethesda's newest IP is also the studio's most technologically impressive title to date, regardless of how you feel about the gameplay quality. Starfield uses the updated Creation Engine 2 to bring Bethesda's open worlds to a modern generation, featuring better visual fidelity and physics than any of their previous titles. That visual upgrade is also reflected in Starfield's system requirements, recommending an RTX 2080 and a Ryzen 5 3600. This seems to be targeting a 1080p resolution, so those looking to play at 1440p or higher will need an even stronger graphics card. And with the large-scale cities on some of Starfield's planets, you'll want to upgrade your CPU as well. Larian Studios' magnum opus has forever changed the RPG genre, and that includes visual fidelity you can expect from an isometric game like this. Baldur's Gate 3 features breathtaking art direction that perfectly captures its D&D source material, all of which is brought to life with stellar lighting and texture work that you'd expect from a AAA title. While the game's isometric camera and turn-based combat might leave the impression that this game's easy to run, that couldn't be further from the truth. Larian recommends a 2060 Super and an R5 3600 for a smooth experience at 1080p. This holds until you enter the massive city of Baldur's Gate itself, wherein you'll need something comparable to a 2080 or a 30 series card to achieve high refresh rates. Forza Horizon 5 is one of the most stunning games released in 2021, and the Forza series is no stranger to beautiful graphic design, so it's not too surprising that this game's going to be pretty demanding. Beautiful lighting, realistic car models, and incredible weather effects all make for an immersive experience that all racing fans can appreciate. It also makes for a rather demanding PC title. The recommended GPU for Horizon 5 is a GTX 1070, a large leap from Horizon 4's recommended GTX 970, and that's just for 1080p resolution running at 60 frames per second. As reported by Digital Foundry, if you want to push Horizon 5 into 4K territory, you'll want at least an RTX 2080 Ti or an RTX 3070. You'll also need a pretty strong CPU to maintain a solid 60 FPS during the game's more performance-heavy races. The Last of Us Part 1 got off to a rocky start for PC users. Naughty Dog's excellent story was sabotaged by a PC port with rampant bugs, memory leaks, and a voracious appetite for VRAM. The good news is that most of those issues have been fixed after release. Even with optimization updates, The Last of Us Part 1 is still a difficult game to run on most systems. You'll need an RTX 2070 Super paired with a Ryzen 5 3600X to hit the game's recommended specs. And as usual, this is targeting a 1080p resolution for 60 frames per second. Thanks to DLSS and FSR2, it's possible to achieve higher frames per second targets on mid-range systems without any major compromises to visual quality. But again, if you're looking for higher than 1080p, you're gonna have to shell out for a much more beefy graphics card. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a highly demanding open-world title for most PCs. The minimum requirements alone ask for a GTX 1070 or a Ryzen 5 3600 just to run the game at 1080p resolution at 30 frames per second. This is an optimistic estimate too, as the game's various hub towns place immense pressure on your system's CPU. The recommended settings aim for a 4K experience at 30 frames per second, suggesting a system with at least an RTX 2080 and that Ryzen 5 3600X, although a stronger CPU is needed for the game's hub areas. And if you want to make use of the ray tracing in the game, you'll need at least a 30 series RTX GPU, if not better. The Resident Evil 4 remake is the perfect remaster of a timeless classic. Capcom has overhauled the visuals of RE4 to deliver a much more immersive experience without compromising on the game's original tone or atmosphere at all. But as with all remakes, those graphical improvements come with higher system requirements. Capcom recommends a GTX 1070 and Ryzen 5 3600 to experience this game at 1080p 60 frames per second. Certain sections can drop the frame rate below this though, so a stronger GPU is recommended. This is especially the case if you plan to run at high resolution textures, as certain scenes can reserve up to 8GB of VRAM. To avoid crashing at max settings, an RTX 3070 or higher is recommended. And just like the last one, if you're looking to make use of ray tracing, you're going to want an even stronger graphics card. You're going to need a fairly powerful PC if you want to explore Cyberpunk's Night City. This game chews through your system memory, requiring at least a GTX 1060 and 12GB of RAM to play on minimum settings. If you want to bring out the beauty of this dystopian setting though, you'll want a rig that can handle ray tracing. The recommended specs can handle low ray tracing, but you ideally want an RTX 3080 Ti or higher for an even more noticeable lighting upgrade. Even with those specs though, Cyberpunk's Cyberpunk's gonna struggle to maintain a consistent frame rate at times, and if you want to play this game with ray tracing at max settings, you'll need an absolute powerhouse of a PC, quite literally, as only the RTX 4090 and a top-tier CPU can run Cyberpunk at these metrics consistently. It might have become even harder to run with Update 2.0, but there have never been more performance options at your disposal. DLSS, frame generation, and a plethora of settings have made it easier than ever to play Cyberpunk on modern systems. So at the very least, get ready to tweak a lot of settings. Alan Wake 2 has the most demanding PC specs we've seen since Cyberpunk 2077. The minimum specs alone list an RTX 2060 and Intel i5 7500K. Most games list those components under recommended specs, not minimum. If you want to experience this game at 60 frames per second, you'll need an RTX 3070 and Ryzen 7 3700X. For 4K resolution with ray tracing, you'll need an RTX 4080 or higher, and that's with DLSS set to performance. It only becomes clear when playing Alan Wake 2 as to why these requirements are so absurd. As Digital Foundry reported, Alan Wake 2 uses forms of software ray tracing to greatly improve the quality of its reflections and ambient occlusion. This makes the game visually striking at even the lowest settings, but Alan Wake 2 becomes downright photorealistic when you enable path tracing, a setting that only the RTX 4080 and